session, and I would now request you to kindly take the session ahead.
A very good evening to everyone present over here. Thank you, Dayashini, for the warm introduction and kind words. I would extend my heartfelt gratitude to the Bengal Forum for providing me with this grand opportunity as the Master of Ceremony for this academic event. iSPELL West Bengal Forum has successfully conducted webinars previously for the continuous academic growth of the scholars. That have been covered earlier have provided the impetus and organized the insightful ideas of the scholars who have participated in these events from time to time. This event has also collaborated with the research interest of the scholars who have been intensely keen in the genre of popular literature. Today's topic is entitled as Reading Chick Lit, Populist Romances or Post-Feminist Paperbacks. Now I would take this grand opportunity to introduce our chairperson, Anuradha Mazumdar ma'am. Anuradha Mazumdar is an assistant professor of English at Professor Chandra College, affiliated to the University of Calcutta. An alumna of Presidency College, Kolkata, she did her master's in English literature from the University of Calcutta and completed her MPhil in English literature from Jadavpur University. She is a PhD research scholar at the University of Burdwan, West Bengal. Her areas of academic interest include Victorian studies, Holocaust studies, Indian English writing, and literature's interface with cinema and popular culture. She is the author of the book Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, with an introduction and explanatory notes published in 2018 by Author Press, New Delhi. Her poetry and short fiction have been published in Setu, News India, and Café de Senses. I welcome you, madam, to this academic session. I would also take this opportunity to introduce our speaker, Dr. Srijanee Roy. Dr. Srijanee Roy is currently employed at Rishi Bankim Chandra College, Naihati, West Bengal, in the capacity of Assistant Professor and Head in the Department of English, both UG and PG studies. She had obtained her PhD degree in English literature from Jadavpur University and served the same institution as UGC, JRF and SRF. She was awarded the prestigious Fulbright Nehru Doctoral Fellowship for visiting the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, USA in 2016. She has 13 years of teaching and research experience. Her publications include several scholarly articles in various international and national books and journals. She has also co-edited the book Women's Empowerment, A Challenge in the 21st Century, which has been published in 2018. I welcome you, madam, to this webinar. Now, before I hand over the session to the speaker, I would request the audience to post their questions, queries, and comments in the chat box. Now, I would request the speaker, Srijanee ma'am, to take over and deliberate on the topic.
Thank you, and hello to everyone. Actually, I would like to thank firstly Shourabda and Shormila. Actually, I never knew of this forum, and I kind of chanced on both of these people while I was making one of those innumerable trips to those very boring official places that we need to visit when we are a part of academia in Bengal. And they just told me that this is this, kind of forum that they are a part of. And of course, after that, I forgot about it, and they too forgot about it, I presume. And after a while, I get this call from Shormila who says that after this kind of dormant period, they are trying to renew the activities of the forum, and they are thinking of me as the speaker. Now, I'm a terrible public speaker, actually. The only place I speak at is my class and nowhere else. I kind of avoid seminars like plague. But I don't know why I thought that I should take this chance to speak to, because it was like this open thing, and they said talk about anything that you want to, and I took the opportunity to talk about the thing that I have researched on. I did my PhD on part of it. So my my talk today, my title of the paper that I'm going to be presenting, or kind of trying to talk about, is reading chick lit, populist romances or post-feminist paperbacks. Now the point is that whenever I try to talk about chick lit, I first clarify what it is, because this sounds phonetically similar to a brand of chewing gum, and oftentimes when I start talking about it, people get confused that this is what you got your PhD degree on, a brand of chewing gum. So I'll define chick lit first, then we'll go on to discuss two of the very seminal texts of which are termed as chick lit. One, I'm sure that we all have learned or heard about it because of our exposure to popular media. If not the books, we have heard about the films, the series, the TV series, etc. So one will be Helen Fielding's Bridget Jones' Diary, and I find that Anuradha ma'am has already worked on Pride and Prejudice, and we all know that how influenced Helen Fielding was while writing by Austen, while writing Bridget Jones. So this will be one book that I'll be talking about, that is Helen Fielding's Bridget Jones' Diary. I won't be talking about the sequels. The book went on, like Helen Fielding went on to produce sequels too. I'll be just talking about the first book, and I'll be talking about Candace Bushnell's Sex and the City. So these are the two books that I'll be essentially talking about as my the prototypes of chick lit. And I'll be talking about all these areas about how chick lit negotiates with terms of post-feminism, with the romances of the earlier generation, the Harlequin and the Mills and Bones romances, etc. So let me start by defining what chick lit is. Now, Leslie Wenger, she was the executive editor of Harlequin Books, and she wrote a book which was named Writing a Romance Novel for Dummies. This was published in 2004. You know the influencer culture. Nowadays, everyone is trying to become popular and rich, and everyone is trying to write instructional manuals, books, blogs, regarding, instructing others about how to become rich and successful. So Leslie Wenger, who was the executive editor of Harlequin Books, wrote a book which was named Writing a Romance Novel for Dummies, which was published in 2004. It was a kind of a know-how book that comes with a lucrative promise for the aspirant romance novelist of making her capable of mastering the art of penning successful romances. In the section, like at the end of the book, in the section which was titled Related Women's Fiction Markets, Wenger mentions erotica, family sagas, and young adult literature, along with chick lit. These are listed as sister genres which contain elements of romance, but the structure and the focus of interest of the narratives vary. Now Wenger writes, and I'm quoting her, this is how she defines chick lit. Chick lit focuses on young, mostly 20-something heroines navigating the perils of single life. These books are very heroine-focused, and the author tells the story in first-person point of view, which differs from the usual third-person approach of romance novels. Key themes include men and how to deal with them, but the heroine's entire life and travails, often humorous, form the backbone of the plot. And a happily ever after ending isn't required and is often pointedly avoided. Most chick lit novels are published in trade paperback. Now, chick lit has been so prominently visible in popular media, right from, say, the beginning of 2000 to, say, around 2014-15. The trend actually died after that. So it has been described so variously as the sex and shopping novel, etc. But I choose this definition for a few reasons. I generally quote this definition because it encapsulates the basic tenets that define chick lit. It marks the intended readership, that is people who are around 40, who are within the age bracket, right, 20 to 30. It designates the basic storyline of it being a woman-centric romance, and most importantly, it demarcates the commercial aspect, that this is a product which caters to a popular market. Now, there has been a lot of debate regarding the maiden use of the term chick lit, and as you can understand that chick is basically a derogatory term, an American slang for a young woman, and lit is of course the diminutive form of literature. So the first use of the term is debated and what it eventually came to designate. So in 1995, there was this book that was compiled, edited by these two women called Chris Mazza and Jeffrey Deschelle. And they had compiled anthology of women's fiction, which was titled Chick Lit Post-Feminist Fiction. This was the title of the book. And Mazza later actually said in an essay that the chick lit in its present form, that is, and I quote Mazza, books flaunting pink, aqua and lime covers featuring cartoon figures of long-legged women wearing stiletto heels, unquote, is not what they wanted it to be. She proclaims that their anthology was to be an active documentation of the liberation from the grim anger of the previous generation feminists, but peppered with an unmistakable ironic tone of narration. In short, stories which were, and I again quote Chris Mazza, she says, simultaneously courageous and playful, frank and wry, honest, intelligent, sophisticated, libidinous, unapologetic, and overwhelmingly emancipated, unquote. Though she emphatically disowns chick lit in its new avatar as one narrowly focusing on career girls looking for love, it may be argued that the legacy of sardonic and playful humor, irreverent and jocular tone, and the attempt to maintain distance from the standards of conventional feminism is carried on even in the popular brand of chick lit publications. Chris Mazza's major objection to chick lit centers on her contention that what was initiated as an effort for dissolving the established standards of feminism and breaking off from the victimized and victimizer binary of radical feminist thought by accepting one's responsibility by admitting to be a part of the problem was eventually overshadowed by this by this blatant commoditization of this genre. Now, proponents and practitioners of high literature have regularly trashed chick lit as nothing but shallow productions by women writers who crave for instant popularity. And this is, of course, we know, like when I was trying to pursue my MPhil in one of the most prestigious universities of West Bengal, and I said that I want to work on chick lit, a very prominent professor who I respect a lot, I owe a lot to her, and she said that why would you bother to waste your time on something that is not even literature? So, this conflict between what we call canonical high literature and what we call popular literature is always there. And I understand, I had to defend myself that why I am trying to work on popular literature for my thesis, and so people who are writing, who are into popular literature, who are trying to write popular literature, how much they have to defend themselves against their art, their practice. So it happened this was initially completely trashed as being nothing but very low-grade productions. So Beryl Bainbridge termed this as a fraught sort of thing. Doris Lessing called it instantly forgettable sagas of helpless girls, drunken, worrying about weight. And I'm quoting these people like these phrases. And therefore chick lit became an easy target for critics' derision. It was relegated to both the subordinate spaces of the popular and the female. Now, though at its onset, when it began, chick lit was meant for a niche audience. So the protagonists were young, single, white, heterosexual, British and American women in their late 20s and early 30s, living in metropolitan areas. But with the growing popularity and incurrence of diversified readership, eventually chick lit got further categorized into subgroups like workplace tell-all, that is, the young woman and her office woes, how she is negotiating with her professional problems and her, workplace politics, maybe also her love life at the same time. The next category was single girl in the city, of course, because, with urbanization, with globalization, with the movement of, with the rising rates of educational qualifications, like women getting more higher degrees with their exposure into the professional field, there was this influx of women into the urban space, and therefore this single girl in the city narratives also claimed to be a major subgenre, thematic subgenre. There was, eventually if a girl is working, she is eventually about to get married, so then came bride lit, then came mom lit, about the new mother, then came hen lit, of course, once you were chick, then you grew up to be a hen, so about middle-aged women, then came matron lit and widow lit. So we understand that, the time frame, it's like how, according to time, time panic, like we're talking about it, there is this term coined by Diane Negra called time panic, and how women's lives are basically kind of sketched according to the yardsticks of this time panic. So these were basically the thematic subgenres, and of course there were the the ethnic subgenres, like from shifting the focus from the British American women, it became like Indian chick lit, Asian chick lit, Hungarian chick lit, Brazilian chick lit, Chicano lit, Latina lit, sister lit. So these were the ethnic subgenres that it diversified into. So at one point, chick lit was all over the markets. Every day there were new titles being published. More and more books were trying to be incorporated into the bracket of chick lit by such acclaimed like publishers like HarperCollins and Penguin, and in India, publishers like Rupa and lesser known publishers. So it is interesting to note that the major thematic subgenres of chick lit indicate a prominent demarcation of the protagonist as well as of the intended readership in terms of the heteronormative compartmentalization of a woman's life on the basis of the yardsticks like her age, marital status, the permitted level of socialization, etc. Now, Diane Negra, in her book, this is the name of the book, What a Girl Wants, Fantasizing the Reclamation of the Self in Postfeminism, argues that, and I quote her, one of the signature attributes of post-feminist culture is its ability to define various female life stages within the parameters of time panic. This rings unquote. This rings so true when read in the context of chick lit, where protagonists not only belong to a particular age group for each subgenre, but also seem to be mortally concerned about the passage of time and the attendant loss of youth and beauty, and therefore seem to be in perpetual rush to find quote-unquote stability in personal and professional arenas. Chick lit, in common terminology, thereby refers to paperbacks with stories of conquests of young women, confessional in tone, often aided by self-critical and self-depreciating humor. But it is also a genre which is primarily criticized for being oblivious to social concerns beyond the protagonist's rather narrow view of world. Ellen Rapping notes that post-feminism is utterly personal and self-serving, and is deemed to be a monstrous deviation from the demands of a global society to be radically reconstructed so that women everywhere, no matter their race, class, or sexual orientation, might have freedom, opportunity, and ability to fulfill their dreams and desires. The predominant obsession with economic well-being, the hankering for upscale consumerist goods and services, or even the hunt for procuring a man for oneself justifies the commercial marketing of the genre as one targeted towards a specific readership comprising middle-class, educated, heterosexual young women willing to read about society life, fashion, career, love, and marriage. Now, oftentimes whenever we speak about chick lit, this tag of it being a post-feminist narrative, it being somehow linked to the concept of post-feminism is always hinted at, because when we come to Bridget Jones, she had been called the poster child for post-feminism. Now, in this part, like in the second part of my talk, I like to talk about why is chick lit being linked to the ideas of post-feminism. Why do we kind of speak of chick lit and post-feminism in the same breath more often than not? So, writing chick lit came in vogue in 1996. This is supposed to be one of those historical markers when this genre came into being. But there had been an earlier book which was called "Waiting to Excel." It was by Terry Macmillan, which was published in 1992, and which roughly could be categorized as a chick lit novel, but the entire market boomed with chick lit writing around 1996, and it was the massive commercial success of Helen Fielding's Bridget Jones's Diary in the United Kingdom and Candace Bushnell's Sex and the City in the United States of America. They were published in the same year, and they were both massively popular. Now, Bridget Jones was termed as the new every woman. This is another, this is a term that Angela McRobbie uses a lot. She wrote a lot, she worked a lot on this entire Bridget Jones phenomenon. So Bridget Jones was termed as the new every woman, who was once again reassuringly feminine, not particularly career-minded, childishly incompetent in her publishing house job, obsessed with weight control, expecting romance, and searching for the right man to marry. Now, Carrie Bradshaw, the protagonist in Sex and the City, was more debonair and cosmopolitan, professional American counterpart to Bridget, who, though looking for love, was not particularly eyeing marriage, who confidently dabbled and experimented with relationships, who aimed for a life of luxury and panache, who engaged in a never-ending homosocial repertory with her three friends. And this, with Sex and the City, this entire concept of the urban family, which features in so many chick lit novels, actually came into being, that you move to the urban space from your own personal family space and you form a family of your own. So your friends, your acquaintances, this is the urban family that kind of become your new source of new family which gives you support and etc. So this classified more as a glamour novel coupled with the romantic comedic elements of humor of Bridget Jones' Diary, and this set the recipe for the chick lit formula. Now, both the books were evolved versions of newspaper columns by the respective authors, written in the form of semi-fictional diaries. And Rochelle Marvey notes that chick lit designates itself as a different genre, and it disengages from popular romance by the means of the trope of familiarization of the protagonist. How that with the current readership, which was shifting from the travails of the impossibly beautiful and undeniably wholesome heroine and the strong hyper-masculine hero, something that we correlate with romances, to the romantic escapades of contemporary young women similar to the novel's intended readers, the fallible and the funny heroines of chick lit. Now, why was this new category of romance taking the market by storm? There had been very specific changes in the status of women post-1980s that can be looked into in this context. The dominant culture of serial cohabitation, the increase in the age of first marriage, and the declining rates of remarriage is said to have led to the popularity of the quote-unquote singleton lifestyles in the Western countries. Women who had already benefited by the quintessential feminist demands of economic independence, professional security, and sexual liberty, but who intended to distance themselves from the stereotype of the hairy, man-hating, bra-burning radical feminists, were now who were comfortable, the women who were comfortable with the expression of their femininity and were willing to display their active sexuality, women who enjoyed consumerist choices and vied for a good life, were providing the required readership for this new evolving genre. More often than not, chick lit protagonist is criticized for upholding neo-traditionalism, retreatism, and downsizing by flaunting their insistence on romance and family, by staying content with feminine, non-assertive jobs, and harboring an affinity towards domesticity. But the opposite can also be argued to be true, because oftentimes chick lit heroines are also portrayed to emphasize the need of personal space and financial liberty, and their desire remains of partnership more meaningful than just a marriage. Therefore, as Pamela Coggy notes, the protagonists of post-feminist fiction may be on one hand act as confident, independent, even courageous women taking responsibility for who they are. On the other hand, they might behave as women who have unconsciously internalized and are acting out the encoded gender norms of our society. Now, post-feminism may be said to emerge at a point of deliberate dissociation and willful departure from the directives of the second wave feminism or feminist thought in theory and practice. This stance nevertheless exemplifies the dichotomy embedded in the late 20th century phenomenon, where the new generation of women claimed that not all the goals that feminism was trying to achieve have been realized, still conventional feminism seemed passé and dated. Now, during 1990s, began a widespread ritualistic denunciation of the second wave, and almost exclusively by women below 30, driven by the threat of getting dated and relegated to history. As Deborah Rosenfeld and Judith Stacy notes, and I quote, post-feminism demarcates an emerging culture and ideology that simultaneously incorporates, revises, and depoliticizes many of the fundamental issues advanced by second-wave feminism. Alice Eccles defines post-feminists to be a generation of women who have enjoyed the benefits of feminism and are often oblivious both to feminism's role in achieving change and the need for continued struggle, unquote. And the benefits of feminism referred to in this context is higher education, economic independence, and most importantly, the freedom of choice. The former feminists at this point came to be regarded as tyrants, advocating radicalism, and therefore they were newly christened as feminazis. The virulent tirade against male-run media, sexist billboards, beauty pageants that the feminists of the 60s so enthusiastically engaged in was now substituted by what can be called a hyper-culture of commercial sexuality, where the new woman in her heels and makeup were actually becoming the willing subjects of male gaze. Now, Shari El-Thurer actually talks about this phenomenon, and she says that smart, and I quote her, smart young women are now resurrecting every stereotype of female sexuality that their feminist mothers attempted to banish, such as sex as currency, tyrannical standards of beauty, consumerism as meaningful, careerism as selfish, and physical appearance as the center of self-worth, unquote. Now, popular culture's inscription on the gender system is one of the defining factors that mold the post-feminist thought. Pop icon Madonna, with a 1984 hit song, Material Girl, shouted out this new woman's demands. And I quote from the song, "'Cause the boy with cold hard cash is always Mr. Right, 'cause we are living in a material world and I am a material girl," unquote. A material girl is one who is driven by consumer culture, one that entails the consumption of not only the goods available, but also the mass-produced images that are its currency. This modern myth, to use the term in the Bathian sense, is therefore forged by a cosmopolitan commercial culture which both produces stereotypes as well as ingests them. Now, chicklit is seen as the popular manifestation of post-feminist thought. Like oftentimes in academia, post-feminism is equated to the third wave of feminism. But people like Rebecca Walker, they were very insistent in noting that post-feminism, as they think of it about, and popular post-feminism are two very different streams of thought. So, chicklit is often associated with this popular manifestation of post-feminist thought as adopted by mass media, which celebrates the pleasure of feminine adornment and heterosexual romance, and does so as a definite post-feminist negation of the feminist denunciation of anything heteronormative or traditionally feminine as being retrogressive, oppressive, and even borderline criminal. From the first day of the publication of Fielding's novel, the opinion about Bridget Jones has been widely divided. For the avid readers of popular women's fiction, she was the new every woman, celebrating her singleton status, her sexual and financial autonomy, erring but thoroughly endearing and identifiable. And for the detractors, Bridget represented the pre-feminist century-old quest for matrimony and the perfect feminine body, a revamped model of the hapless and helpless female protagonist of conventional romances. In fact, it may be argued that Bridget's appeal actually stems from this contradiction in her position. On one hand, she is the new woman who takes delight in her independent lifestyle and her friends' choices. On the other hand, she is the aging single girl in her early 30s who obsesses over the perils of singlehood and daydreams about romance and marriage. In a sense, Bridget combines in herself the contradictions of post-feminism. She struggles to produce an amalgamation of feminist demands of economic and sexual freedom with the conventional romantic aspirations. The characteristic confusion and indecisiveness that lends girlish appeal to Bridget stems from her characteristic dilemma of trying to choose for a proper role model. For instance, and this is something happens in the novel. For instance, when she is reading John Gray's celebrated self-help manual, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, this is the name of the book, which offers tips regarding handling the opposite sex better, she intends to impress or maybe repulse Mark Darcy. Now, Helen Fielding, she said that she was so impressed by Austen's Pride and Prejudice that she could not really name her protagonist, her male protagonist, anything but Mr. Darcy. So this man is called Mark Darcy, and this is a party that they are in, and she had been reading this self-help book, and she says that she was basically, when Mr. Darcy asks that what are you reading at this moment, and he says that she says that she had been reading Susan Falud's book, which is called Backlash: The Undeclared War Against American Women, which was this vituperative feminist take on post-feminism, and she says that she had been reading that. Once again, Bridget decides to use her boss's clearly sexually suggestive messages about her attire at the office as an opportunity to take forward their clandestine flirtational male repartee rather than reading it as an instance of sexual harassment at the workplace. Now, this looks back at Katie Roffey's book, The Morning After, Sex, Fear and Feminism on Campus, which was published in 1993, a post-feminist rant at radical feminism's over-insistence on remedying workplace sexual harassment and perils of date rape as being overblown and over-publicized. Bridget has no doubt moved forward from radical feminism's angst and is working towards finding place in the post-feminist ethos. Now, Bridget's incessant cribbing about her follies and shortcomings, her insecurities and dilemmas, make her not only lifelike, but also make her the prototype of the hundreds of inept and incompetent and unsure chicklet heroines to come. So eventually we would get titles like, when it comes to Indian chicklet, there is a book by Deva Priya Roy which is called The Vague Woman's Handbook. So the chicklet heroine is supposed to be confused and kind of, clueless, etc., like Bridget was. So this prototype was once again established by Fielding. Bridget no doubt aims at self-development. She keeps this to-do and not to-do list from the beginning of the novel. Her obsessive diary keeping and the tabulation of achieved and unachieved goals at the end of the year, which actually coincides with the end of the book. But humor is extracted from her own blindness to, and Fielding's insinuation at the superficiality of her resolutions, where she obsesses about losing weight, attaining a healthy lifestyle, being more sociable, enriching her mind and finding the right man, but finally fails in most of the goals due to her own inability to stick to her self-designed guidelines. This way, Chicklet indeed enacts a realistic parody of the popular romantic formula and reconsiders traditional Bildungsroman patterns. The very process of meticulous diary keeping with details of calorie consumption, weight fluctuations, and minute-by-minute account of the day makes Bridget a self-monitoring subject who continuously aims at crafting the perfect self. But her obsessive self-observation and the futility of the self-help dictates she intends to follow, often unrealistic, contradictory, and therefore unattainable, makes her the subject of Fielding's ironic commentary. So, as Daphne Markin would say, that Bridget Jones is both every woman and implicitly the ironic observer of every woman. Now, according to Anthea Taylor, Bridget Jones is the most highly visible single woman of Western post-feminist culture to date. She is emphatically post-feminist in the popular sense of the term, since her insistence on feminine signifiers like her body, romance, marriage, and children puts her in conflict with the radical feminist ideology. Bridget is clever and witty in her own feminine way. She exemplifies a kind of scatterbrain and endearing femininity. She is the subject who has been advantaged by the liberal feminist claims of equal educational and professional opportunities, but who cannot possibly answer to the radical feminist call of negating femininity and heterosexual romance as being downright oppressive. Despite Bridget's desperate husband hunting, the novel positively highlights the sassy, independent, self-assured existence of a singleton, and as Imelda Welean says, that the term singleton does suggest a more positive and slant than the predecessor, the term that was used earlier, that is spinster. But a singleness is not an outcome of her professional success. She is equally incompetent in finding a man as she is in excelling in her job, and thereby she subverts the popular post-feminist dictate that woman can't have it all, because she is good at neither. She is neither good at her job, not at her, at fulfilling her romantic aspirations. In this respect, her singleness has no bearing to her quasi-feminist stance of celebrating independence, which again is a position that she easily vacillates from, with her constant cribbing against singleness. Overall, Bridget comes across as the identifiable and relatable working woman who intends to find romance and security, an idealist at heart but with endless human flaws, therefore appealing in her own way. Now, apart from this, how Bridget's stance is related to the popular brand of post-feminism, another thing comes across very clearly in chick lit novels is the heroine's association with the consumerist culture. So Bridget is the self-proclaimed child of cosmopolitan culture, Cosmopolitan being that upscale magazine, that upscale lifestyle magazine for women, who compulsively consumes the image of feminine perfection that is marketed by women's magazines, self-help books, and lifestyle guides. Fielding therefore exaggerates Bridget's consumer behavior as a means of critiquing the problematic consumption practices endorsed by these publications. Being the model consumer with purchasing power, Bridget also classifies as the target to whom popular media directs to sell the very image of a consumerist heterosexual feminized woman who actively participates in romantic manhunts, who aims at the perfect body, and who actively dissociates from the man-hating, ungroomed, androgenic second-wave feminists. Bridget's insistence on achieving the tropes of traditional womanhood, though she also constantly, cribs about the life of what she calls the smug marrieds, this makes her a true blue post-feminist and a neo-traditionalist. Her job is not her profession, as she herself points out, and it might be safely assumed that she would most likely settle for domesticity and motherhood if given a choice. The finish line of her quest is conjugal assurance and economic stability, both to be sourced from a suitable husband. It becomes clear why Bridget could easily be branded as neo-traditionalist, almost pre-feminist in her inclinations, and therefore it becomes interesting to note why such a role model for every woman would be adopted so widely in the 21st century around the globe. Now, coming to the next novel that I'll be talking about, that is Sex and the City by Candace Bushnell. So this was also very popular. This became this extensive HBO series, then was adapted into films with very many sequels. So the cultural phenomenon that Sex and the City came to take the shape of commenced as a column in New York Observer, which presented a fictionalized autobiographical account of Candace Bushnell's sexual and social exploits, which graduated to a best-selling book in 1996 and finally gained the cult status as the voice of post-feminist woman when adopted as the television series by HBO in 1998. The narrative looks at the lives of four 30-something fashionable and financially independent Manhattanites going through the relationship challenges. A debate ensues regarding the portrayal of the relentless search for the right man by these four women who are brilliant and liberated as being essentially anti-feminist, since even after having the economic and sexual freedom that the last generation feminists essentially fought for, Carrie Bradshaw and her friends are shown to enjoy their singleness. It is certain, but it is not really it is not to be positioned as a state that they have actively chosen or wish to prolong. A varied range of sexual behavior is explored by these women, but finally concluding in idealized romantic destinations of heterosexual coupledom, since for all of them, marriage to a wealthy man still represents the best prospect for financial and emotional security. On the other hand, it might be argued that marriage most obviously for them is a matter of active choice for meaningful companionship and not just a measure to escape the spectre of spinsterhood, nor it is the pleasantest preservation from want. Though finally paired with desired female companions, these women do not necessarily settle for conventional marriages. Like Carrie is visibly distressed by the idea of marrying even the potentially perfect man Adian, who she had been dating for a while. Rather, her most coveted book launch is seen as a marriage replacement where she comes dressed as a bride. Because, as Ashley Nelson notes, and I quote, the women's uncertainty about marriage is informed by the belief that it requires sacrificing too much of one's individuality, unquote. The prolonged experiments that these women undergo for finding the right man make them cross the expected age of marriage, childbirth, as well as single motherhood, as in Miranda's case. Miranda is one of Carrie's friends, whose story is also told through the course of the novel, becomes a matter of active choice. Though the protagonists undertake the conventional romantic quest, they also actively flaunt the traditional societal limits of age and mode of companionship, and in this regard, they uphold the need for personal choice, which is integral to post-feminist thought. Manhattan, which is known for, which is the setting for Sex and the City, and which is well known for its highly skewed ratio of eligible men to women, enhances the competition quotient for sexual survival, a trend that becomes evident from the anthropological jargon that is used by the narrator. The city is therefore essentially presented as a ruthless urban jungle where the struggle for existence equates the struggle for traditional identity formation in terms of consummating successful heterosexual relationships. Much has been said about the female friendship, the female camaraderie that is portrayed among the four women, a bond which is said to be more of a coinage of the HBO television series than that of Bushnell's columns, which displayed a more cynical view of female friendship, sprinkled with sexual jealousy and spitefulness. In Bushnell's New York Observer columns, the connection among the four women were actually like sporadic, often rivalrous, and often downright hostile. The friends nevertheless comprise the post-feminist urban family, which serves as an alternative, albeit a temporary one, to heterosexual bonding, which the women might fall back on in between relationships with men. They stand by each other in difficult times, championing a strong female homosocial bonding, providing an objective commentary on each other's relationship issues, and therefore their repartees functioning as a sort of consciousness raising session. The social nexus that is presented by Bushnell is no doubt constricted, since all four of the protagonists are white, heterosexual, and financially privileged. The HBO series has been repeatedly censured for its covert ethnocentrism, for xenophobia, and even implied homophobia and racism. Now, the social nexus presented in Bushnell is no doubt constricted, since all four of its protagonists are white, heterosexual, and financially privileged. Chick lit is more often than not criticized for reinforcing stereotypes and valorizing orthodoxy than putting forward an alternative feminist point of view. Sex and the City television series initially presented a new vision of urban female singlehood as glamorously threatening than as sad and lonely, which made the four women the new face of feminist revolution, though they were clearly divided in their feminist standpoints. Miranda and Carrie, two of the protagonists, were the second wave enthusiasts who believed in egalitarianism. Charlotte and Samantha were basically the other two, were more like the post-feminist type, the third wavers, focused on exploiting the power of femininity from opposing angles. The four women presented a wide range of sexual opinions. Samantha was the most liberated and experimental. Charlotte was the most orthodox, while Miranda, presented the cynical voice of reason, and Carrie actually stood in the crossroads and who was essentially a romantic. The Sex and the Single Girl is the professed locus of the discourse. It features an active engagement by its female protagonists in the renegotiation of the classic romantic fantasy. These women are active pursuers in mating game and thereby working up a reversal of male gaze, but not quite so. Their own obsession with the right body image, right attire, and right accessories comment on their way of judging their own bodies from the quintessential male point of view. The narrative is often relegated for presenting a post-feminist fairy tale where young, economically independent, career women are reaping the rewards of feminist struggles even as they pander to traditional images of feminine beauty. In the true post-feminist vein, the power of these suave Manhattanites equate a heady mixture of feminine attractiveness, sexual valor, and purchasing capacity. Consumer demands coupled with disposable money make these women the active purchasers of a particular lifestyle, fusing panache and profligacy. Carrie is helplessly fixated with branded clothing, shoes, and lifestyle products, with her consumerist zeal equating, if not exceeding, her enthusiasm for finding Mr. Right. Manhunt, as well as the quest for glamour and glitz, defines the post-feminist makeup, which specifies these concerns as the neo-feminist markers of personal choice. Undoubtedly, Sex and the City repeatedly questions the social ramifications of being single, but the specter of singleness is often neutralized by the power, money, and autonomy of single women. For Carrie, her Manolo Blahniks, that is her shoes, work as child surrogates, and she proclaims that she would never be going to be a mother because it is once again this proclamation of her choice, her right over her own body. And she says that these shoes eventually become her child surrogates, and this is a world where males actually vie with products, and men are also judged on the yardstick of their style quotient and therefore their financial standards. So with this, I basically come to the, one second. With this, we basically come to the the last part of my presentation, which talks about this kind of this association that chick lit has with romance, the conventional romances, the Harlequin, the Milton Boons, and even the tradition of romances. Now, feminists like, say, German Greer or Susan Brown Miller have often seen popular romances as a great threat, propagating rape culture, female masochism, and prevalent masculine dogma, expressed through the characterization of the heroine, and in turn mindlessly consumed by the female reader. It is interesting to note that at a time when the feminists spoke so strongly against the sense of escapism, fantasy, and domesticity that the popular romances preached, there was a meteoric rise in the production and sales of Milton Boons and Harlequin romances in the early 20th century. Now, romantic fiction was distrusted by the feminists because they thought that romance holds women in an unrealistic utopian view, far displaced from uninspiring reality. Domesticity and passivity were linked to the figure of the Romance reader as opposed to the active and revolutionary feminist. The housewife, the figure of the housewife was stereotypical. She was characterized by dependence, childishness, and addiction to romantic fantasies. In this way, the housewife became the negative opposite to the heroic feminist. Popular culture, and in this case popular romances, were blamed by feminists for creating this unequal power balance and thus limiting women in their desires, ambition, and achievements. The ire that the popular romances faced from the feminists was not without a cause, though. The young, delicate heroines of Mills and Boons were always appropriated into conjugality at the end of the novel by the dominant, assertive heroes. Now, this Rosalind Jones, she notes that though oftentimes the heroine proved her mettle during troubled times, or were often seen working or traveling alone, time and again with very challenging and bizarre jobs in the later Harlequins, the office romances, at the end they returned to the man and his home. Feminism as a doctrine was never directly mentioned or directly alluded to, and the heroines willfully stayed clear of any such association. The working woman's ambition, her love for city life and freedom, her autonomy, were most happily forsaken, and the ending almost inevitably assigned a future defined by the needs of the hero. The gigantic industry that Harlequin had forged is generally attributed to the mass consumption of the trope of escapism that these romances offered. Now, in this context, it is worth questioning that during the 1960s and the 70s, even before that, when women were gradually venturing out of the home into the workspace, why was it important to create, why was this fictional space of escapism becoming so popular? Why was it so sought after? Now, Tanya Modleski actually writes that it is very important to understand the fact that why women still needed to escape from reality and take refuge in fiction at that point. She argues that the heroine's power over the hero that is manifested by the bond that romance provides, it actually creates this rhetoric of self-assertion that is so lacking in the real world of the reader, fraught with gender inequality and male domination. Now, chick lit has often been represented as a twin genre to popular romance, with the love life of a young girl at the center of narration. But the chick lit protagonist firstly differs from the romance heroine in terms of age and experience. She is older, active, and experienced, at least eager to gain experience of all kinds, and therefore a far cry from the young, virginal, naive heroine of the popular romances. While commenting on the massive appeal of the romances on working women, Leslie Rabine notes, and I quote her, focusing on the juncture between their sexual emotional needs on the one hand and their needs concerning work relations on the other, it involves both their deepest, most private, most intimate feelings and at the same time their very broad relations to the process of social history, unquote. This rings true for chick lit, which is often said to have developed from the Harlequin office romances, which were gradually leaning towards more professionally active and assertive heroines. Courtship rituals are always crucial to romance, more often than not dealing with how the rakish hero is revived by the goodness of the heroine and molded into a sensitive human being. This holds true for office romances too, where the affluent and alpha male boss needs to be emotionally salvaged by the heroine. But in chick lit, office romances fail more often than not, with the boss discrediting himself and proving himself unworthy of all efforts of goodness. The classic example of this being Bridget's failed romance with Daniel Cleaver and her eventually finding love and, moving to conjugality with Mark Darcy. Stephanie Herzersky, who was one of the earliest researchers to work on this association of chick-lit with post-feminism, she writes, and I quote her, "Chick-lit's most significant deviation from the Harlequin lies in its representation of men. Men serve various functions while some love objects. The chick-lit heroine relation to men is often close to that of the picaresque than that of romance." Now, while chick-lit is frequently concerned for finding a proper, in the chick-lit, the heroine is often concerned to find a proper mate, but it is always, the emphasis is given on the fact that there is no person who can be defined as Mr. Right. This deviation from the trope of wish fulfillment and romanticizing marriage is a mark of chick-lit's deviation from the romance genre. Though they want to find a husband, a rich one at that, the heroine by no means holds undue romantic expectation from conjugality and marriage. At the end of the novel, marriage as a prospect is often avoided as a stance of defiance against the formula of romance. Tanya Modleski writes, and I quote her, "If romances are novels of illusion, upholding belief in the perfect man, perfect sex, and a life lived happily ever after, many chick-lit novels may be called novels of disillusionment," unquote. Modleski goes on to find in chick-lit a definite potential of feminist backlash to romance due to the amount of energy spent deploring male behavior, describing bad sexual experiences, and even questioning the institution of marriage. Modleski's reading is noteworthy since chick-lit is so often seen as a voice of post-feminism, bringing in neo-traditionalism, just like what romance is intended to do. Not only regarding the position of the hero, but also in terms of the heroine's consideration of her profession, does chick-lit sit in dubious balance. There are instances of the protagonist holding a minor job, viewing marriage as a means of obtaining particular lifestyle, very unlike the selfless, guileless romance heroines, and thereby viewing money as important as love. There are also instances of the heroine finding refuge in productive work, and when the desired man proves to be the wrong one, or even cases of chick-lit protagonist holding on to work as means of self-worth and individualism over love life. Therefore, it can be said that chick-lit definitely defies the homogenization regarding the heroine's attitude towards independent profession, making it alter the expectation from popular romances on several levels. Now, I'll just conclude. Janice Radway, in her very seminal book, which was called Reading the Romance, Women, Patriarchy, and Popular Literature, noted that apart from the content of the romance novels, it was their marketing and advertising which were instrumental in their success. Romance's recent success also coincides with important changes in book production, distribution, advertising, and marketing techniques. This is what she writes. In fact, the predominance of female readership and gradual monopoly of female authors and readers over the romance genre is a recent phenomenon, notes Rosalind Jones in her discussion of Mills and Boon romances. And I quote her, "It was written and read by aristocrats of both sexes until the 18th century. Only then did it begin to be mocked as feminine preoccupation. Its specifically feminine readership in the 1980s is determined not only by cultural habit, but by a concerted program of market research, mass publication, and multimedia advertising," unquote. It is indeed noteworthy how marketing plays a major role in proliferation of modern-day popular fiction, including chick-lit. Popular journals and tabloids regularly publish both pre-launch summary as well as post-launch review of the new titles in the market. The publishing houses organize book reading sessions with a group of chicklit authors. At the launch of a particular title, the chicklit authors seem to be a part of a sorority who stand for and with each other in the common space of shared experiences. The lowly priced books made for quick and temporary consumption targeted at a particular section of readers is the marketing strategy behind both popular romances and chicklit titles. Radway studies how in America romances were sold in a setup of urban consumption. Similarly, chicklit imprints are designed to be sold not in bookstores but in shopping marts, departmental stores, and supermarkets. Therefore, both in case of popular romance, chicklit books are often seen as mass productions of particular industry, often lacking distinct individualization. I'll just conclude that it would therefore be safe to conclude that chicklit is definitely not old popular romances served in new packaging. It certainly holds its own exclusive appeal in terms of style, treatment, and subject matter. Again, it would also be safe to infer that chicklit is not merely a product of anti-feminist backlash, but it can be traced back to novel of manners, self-help books, female Bildungsroman, and even celebrated feminist tales of liberation. With these diverse roots informing it, chicklit therefore presents a complex analysis of life and times it portrays and demands more attention than just being stamped as another popular cultural outpour of the silly female mind. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker and congratulate her for her outstanding and engrossing talk, where she had provided many insightful views about the jaw of chicklit, and I'm sure that the audience has benefited from her well-researched topic, which will actually inspire them to navigate effortlessly in the arena of popular literature. Thank you so much, madam, for providing us with an interesting and stimulating approach to the present topic. Now I would request the chairperson, Anuradha Mazumdar, to share her observations on the present topic.
Anuradha, you are on mute mode.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Now am I audible and visible? Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sharmila and Shilpi, for calling on me to make my observations on this. First of all, let me just congratulate Srijanee, for such an interesting, such a stimulating talk. Also, let me congratulate her for choosing a kind of a topic that is, unlike what your respected professor at the university said, very, very academic, very relevant and pertinent for the times. And, obviously the two seminal texts that Srijanee has chosen, Sex and the City and Bridget Jones's Diary, I think, all of us present here could not have missed those two seminal texts, either in the form of the written text or in the form of the TV series or the film. And what I really enjoyed about the talk is how Srijanee first of all located the genre of the chicklit within its literary or can we say popular literary tradition, because that is very important, and in order to be taken seriously, in order to be appreciated for what they are. So the talk wonderfully did that. It locates the genre within the popular literary tradition, and then she defines and demarcates its subgenres, the mommy-lit, the nanny-lit, and the office-lit, and office romance-lit, and so on. And she also briefly summarizes right at the beginning of the talk the general critical attitude to Shiklet, which is very important because it is predominantly one of derision. And then the rest of the talk obviously focused on how to counter argue that, and also how to explain the post-feminist approaches or post-feminist discourses, or rather sensibility, and how it applies to the Shiklet genre. So while doing so, I was making my own notes, so I would like to read a bit from there. And while doing so, Srijanee has also discussed the complex mesh of cultural ideas as well as approaches that all add up to the term post-feminism. As it is, the term is highly debated because it is so very uncertain in its application. Whether to hyphenate the words post and feminism is again a very, very important, it's highly debated. So, all the cultural approaches and ideas, especially in circulation in the mass media, in the popular cultural domain, that add up to the word post-feminism. That is a post in the sense of after feminism, that is after the 1980s radical second wave, and also a post in the sense of the contemporary tendency to repudiate and reject feminism, especially once again the bra-burning, man-hating kind of 1980s feminism. So Srijanee also talks of how the genre of the Shiklet produces a new version, I would say a very convenient version of feminism, an acceptable feminism. All the while, perhaps we forget that when the genre of the Shiklet came into existence, it was in the background of a very, very, predominantly lad culture. And it was against this lad culture, which was often very misogynistic, that the genre of the Shiklet came in, the lady culture, the girl culture. So we really cannot write off Shiklet as being a post-feminist product in the sense that, we have seen a cultural shift away from women's lib to girl power. No, but that power itself is very, very contested. What kind of power? So since I was asked to make my observations, I would argue that it is basically consumerist power. We have economic independence, but very little of the other kinds of independence which had been, the intention of the feminists to achieve. So yes, a very convenient feminism, a popular feminism, a version of feminism that shows an entanglement with neoliberalism, or rather neoliberal capitalism, that emphasizes women's professional and economic success, but not, and it's a very important but not, at the cost of family. This is the neoliberalist capitalist economy. You go ahead, study, and you make a career and everything, but not at the cost of family. So the Shiklet in its own way, as Srijanee has very ably, put across, and therefore it hardly requires me to sum up, the Shiklet in its own way, even while underscoring the established genre stereotypes, also problematizes the stereotypes, by staying away from conventional endings of conjugality, as Srijanee has very rightly pointed out. So it is obviously a deviation from the genre of the romance, the popular romance, the Barbara Cartland, Milton Boone kind of romance that we all grew up on, and also moving away from romantic wish fulfillment, which can obviously save it from the charge of escapism. Yes, and yet it also makes me wonder when we look at the central figure, Bridget Jones or, Bradshaw, when we look at them, it really makes me wonder how far has the central protagonist really moved ahead in terms of independence, which has been one of the, the highlighted, underscored words of the feminist movement. How independent or what kind of independence has she achieved? So I would go on, I think actually, to, that it is basically the kind of independence that pinpoints her identity as a successful consumer. More than any other kind of independence, she is the successful consumer. Visits, goes on shopping sprees and, the sort of binges on chocolate to give herself a mood lift. So all very, very consumerist, So a successful consumer more than anything else. So this leads us to really wonder at the role of the capitalist economy, at the role of capitalism itself, of the market economy. How far do we think that the capitalist society that we live in produces, circulates, and also endorses the idea of a convenient womanhood who has to be a good consumer for capitalist enterprises to keep flourishing, but at the same time, who is very conveniently and inoffensively woman. The kind of rose whose thorns have been sanitized out of existence. So I think this is I may be wrong, Srijanee, please correct me if you think so, but from my reading of Shiklet over the years, I am very interested, by the way, in the genre, and I never miss an opportunity of watching such films, etc., to understand where we stand as women today. Whether our understandings of gender are in conversation with one another or in conflict with each other. So yes, I think that as far as the Shiklet is concerned, yes, it is a deviation from the norm, from the romance novel and everything, but at the same time, as Srijanee also pointed out, that it somehow stays very conveniently close to popular feminism. So this will be all that I can right at this moment talk about, having gathered this kind of an idea from Srijanee's talk. So you are welcome to share your views with me too. So Saurabh or Shilpi, and it's over to you now. I hope I made some sense.
Thank you, madam. You definitely made a huge amount of sense. Thank you for your enthusiastic approach and enriching comments on the topic. It was an interesting take on your part that has, critically analyzed and interpreted certain perspectives which have been related to the present topic or present domain of study, I would rather say. Observations are always considered to be a very crucial. It gains much more interest. Observations were welcoming aspects regarding this genre, regarding this field of study, and you have also done a fantastic work by assimilating the views in your own individualistic style. Thank you, madam.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Srijanee and Shilpi and everyone on this board.
Now I will be focusing on certain questions that have been asked in the chat box. I can see one relevant question which has been made by Prashanta sir. Prashanta sir has said that it was a very beautiful presentation. And the question is, do we have Czech literature or shades of this type in Indian English literature?
I presume the question was directed to me, right?
Yeah, ma'am. I'm asking.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for the question, and please, may I know the name of the person who posted the question?
Yeah, Prashanta Chakraborty.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the question. Yes, Indian chiclet is had been really big at one point of time. So it started with publication of books by a few writers like Advaita Kala and Rupa Gulab and Anuja Chauhan right around say 2004. So it almost took a decade for that entire, the kind of changes that were taking place in the in an Anglo-American world, in the entire European scenario. It almost took a decade in this, world of globalization and neoliberalization that Anuradha ma'am had been talking about. And with this, India opening up to the global media, like with the privatization of the television, that is Doordarshan not being the only channel that was available to us. With that, with the arrival of the so-called cable TV, and we being exposed to the entire idea of the lifestyle changes that were taking place in the other part of the world, this entire phenomena actually traveled to India. And India too, there had been such a massive change in terms of urbanization, in terms of the rising educational levels of women, of the influx of women from the semi-urban, rural spaces into the urban space, getting into the workforce. And this was basically around 2000, that is, around the year 2000, and the end of the 20th century. There had been this great influx of women who were coming into the Indian urban space, and they were kind of facing the same kind of challenge. And now the conflict was even murkier, because they had to, on one hand, there was this entire idea of modernization, and they had to fight back the orthodoxy, the traditionalism. And they had to form the urban family of their own. They had to experiment with alternative mode of sexualities. They had to kind of wade through this entire, these challenges of existence. And therefore, there was this huge market of Indian chiclet, which kind of lived on from, say, around 2004 to, I'll take a decade, around 2014. But eventually, like as it happened in the world market, this basically eventually died down. The trend eventually died down. But yes, of course, it was not only Western chiclet that these Indian chiclet novels were drawing from, but there had been predecessors, like writers like Shobha Dev, certain novels by Namita Gokhale. There had been certain writings by Manjula Padmanabhan, which had been, in the market. So here too there had been a very definite division between the so-called popular and canonical in terms of Indian literature by women, in the Indian market. And chiclet became big over here too. And though it was oftentimes derided to be like the copy-paste versions of the Western genre, but still, eventually chiclet went on to carve a niche of its own.
We have another question from Shudeshna Datta ma'am. Do these chiclet romances have any positive effects on the new generation? If so, in what ways?
Okay. Now, judging literature is like it's a very, very troublesome thing. One can't really say that how something affects someone in what way. But what I gather from reading of these novels is let me talk about the Indian chiclet novels themselves. Most of the times they are pretty shoddy productions. They are very cheap paperbacks. These books are not really meant to to be, preserved, not meant to be kept in the library. And when I was trying to gather books, I could find none in our quintessential book markets in College Street. There was nothing that could be found. I had to order them online over Flipkart. I had a Flipkart guy coming, Amazon and Flipkart guy is coming to my home every day. I was collecting all the titles that I could possibly collect, and there had been, at that point of time, I had collected around 50 titles. So what I'm trying to say is that whether or not these have any kind of effect on the reading, on the readers, on the target audience, but it's definitely true that it resonates in some way or the other with these readers. Like, if there was such a big market for these novels, who are reading them? And as I have been saying for so long, and as we all know, popular literature is more about, it's like an industrial production. It's not really any, they are not really thinking about individualization or any, aesthetic component of the entire thing, but rather they are thinking of it as a product. So there must have been demand for this product that people were reading it. And oftentimes, you find the language is, very juvenile, very much too colloquial. Oftentimes the productions are pretty bad, pretty shoddy. But still, there were people who were reading it. And in chick lit too, you find that there are good chick lit and there is bad chick lit. Like, there is a wide range of, qualitative quality that they cover. So it is, I can't really, I'm sorry, but I can't really answer this query that whether it has any positive effect on the generation or not, but it was reflecting the time, the mind of those women who were reading about it and who were looking forward to these novels as a sort of shared experience. That was happening.
Srijanee, you are mute.
Sorry, very sorry. Thank you so much, Srijanee, for the answer. Actually, I wanted to mean that I thought I didn't know really so much about chicklets, and I didn't have these visions also about chicklets, so the separate genre. But really, I found it interesting. Just today, probably I discovered, because my work is with the teenagers. I work in a school. So I felt that at least people are reading. that maybe at least they're having touching a book. And that is so much positive effect, I think, myself. Just now, after hearing you, I found that at least people are reading. Otherwise, why they are selling so much? So thank you for this.
Twin-lit, like, for the youngsters. So, even before you go to the office and face the challenges, there are challenges in your twin life that you need to deal with. So there has been once again a niche for that too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So since we don't have any more questions in the chat box, I would like to ask from the audience if anybody wants to make any kind of comments or observations on your topic.
If I may make a couple of observations. Shilpi, may I?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Yeah. First of all, Srijanee, thank you very much for its wonderful and well-researched presentation. When I was in my college days, I used to hear, there were discussions about who is greater, the writer or the critic. And today, the way you have presented your paper and the way Anuradha has summed it up, I went back to my college days confused about deciding who is the greater one, the writer or the critic. Thank you, both of you. And as Srijanee, I have a couple of observations. Like, you have actually, through today's talk, you have broken the barrier between literature and, let's say, popular culture. Chick lit is not only a part of genre in literature, it's also a culture. It's a tremendous culture. It's a huge culture. So I was wondering, I don't have any expertise in this field, so I will not be asking you questions. All the academic things have been discussed, done and dusted between the two of you. So I have just one observation I'll say. That is, I was wondering, like, in the 1993 and 94, if I'm not wrong, there came the boys band, Backstreet Boys, and the Spice Girls. about the same time when this Anuradha said ladlit and this chicklit came. So you see that first the ladlits come and then the chicklets. First Backstreet Boys come and then Spice Girls. So is it actually not only post-feminism but also a kind of, let's say, a reaction to the boy bands and the boy literatures? That is one part of my observation that I'd like to know from you. And the second is that, you see, I was talking about this being a kind of culture. If you look at the pop market, the pop market in the world today, we have this what is called the BTS. So there's only Harry Potter and BTS doing the rounds in the world today. So do you feel that BTS has broken this, what should I say, gender divide between ladlit and, let's say, chicklit? Your observations on that? I might sound silly, but then that's a very pertinent question, I think.
Yes, thank you, Shorabda. Firstly, as Anuradha ma'am pointed out, because I wanted to talk about many more things, and I thought that I was completely, putting people off to, they were dozing off, and I was kind of reading my paper, etc. So, like this thing itself, like yes, ladlit had been big, and chicklit indeed, kind of, I wouldn't say that it was a reaction to that, but both actually developed in a coterminous way. And this insistence that chicklit focuses essentially on women and men are basically relegated to the margins, to the, they are not really given that much of limelight, was essentially a reaction against ladlit. That is true. And regarding what you ask about, what was the first part? That Spice Girls came after Backstreet Boys. Okay, so yes, I'm sure that the entire universe was conspiring in some way or the other for this entire sequence of things to take place. So I'm very sure that everything was happening for a reason, and this had a connection in some way or the other. And as you say about BTS, once again it is like huge, and when you talk about popular culture, nothing is independent of the other parts of popular culture. We cannot really neglect them. And nowadays, there's breaking of gender binary is essentially, a part of the cultural phenomena. So everywhere we see, even in the later chicklit, I'll just give you a very small instance that initially as in Sex and the City, as I said, that it sometimes read to be pretty homophobic because the homosexual, the gay and lesbian characters who were portrayed were often very stereotyped. Eventually, when chicklit grew, this acceptance, the kind of relationships that were shown among the people who were catering to the alternative modes of sexuality absolutely changed. So I think that, this entire idea about breaking gender binaries, about making gender much more fluid, much more accepting is something that is it's the trend of the day. And BTS is eventually a product of that. And I'm very sure that it is one of their USP. The kind of popularity that they basically enjoy amongst people from all the sexes, all kind of sexual affiliation. It actually talks about how we are we are gradually opening up to these concepts of gender fluidity.
Thank you, Srijanee.
Can I make one observation, Shora,
yes,
regarding your question?
Yeah, sure.
Sure, I was also thinking, as far as we were talking in terms of the Backstreet Boys versus the Spice Girls and so on, but I guess there's not really a versus, which even Sheryl Sandberg realized, because when she published her book in 2013, that is Leaning, Women Work and Leaning In, the whole concept of leaning in and seizing opportunity, by women in the corporate sector, by offering leadership, even when, they are facing a kind of a personal crisis, like, having children and so on. Sandberg was advising women to lean in and seize the opportunity of professional success. But later she also realized that this could not really happen unless the men also in their lives lent in. So she went on to sort of correct herself in 2015, saying that, okay, men, you can also lend in. And I had made two very important mistakes. She said, I'm summing up, that men can also lean in, number one. And number two is that, while she said that while she was talking about women, leaning in and grabbing opportunities, she had not really counted the experience of single mothers who raised children by themselves, all alone. So what about them leaning in? Who would give them or provide them the opportunity of leaning in when there was a child at home, to care for? So basically, as Srijanee rightly said, I believe that, these gender boundaries are breaking up for a reason. And as she said that, BPS in particular, their huge appeal, I guess they owe to partly also to their, I may be killed for saying it, but very androgynous appearance. So yes, both in terms of appearance and in terms of the way we think up work and leadership and the sense of assertiveness, I am, not much liked everywhere because of being assertive. So, it's important that, you break up these boundaries. Assertion is not something that you can cubby hole for the man. So, this kind of breaking of gender boundaries is important, and I guess it is, it is happening. Though a long way to go, it is happening. So, that is it. I don't know whether I should...
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really interesting. Srijanee, I really once again congratulate you for choosing such an interesting and absorbing topic. And thank you, iSPELL, for being part of this.
And giving you wonderful,
So, Shilpi, if you can just carry on, take it over from here and wind up. So,
Sure, sir. Thank you, Srijanee ma'am, for your thought-provoking ideas, which you have brilliantly conceptualized in your topic on chiclet. I, on behalf of iSPELL Forum West Bengal, congratulate you for this wonderful and illuminating talk. Thank you once again. Now I will hand over the session to the event coordinator, Srijanee.
Thank you so much, Shilpi. That was indeed a very insightful session. Thank you, Professor Roy and Professor Majumdar, for sharing your knowledgeable insights with us. And then I request Dr. Madhumita Majumdar, the President of iSPELL West Bengal Forum, to virtually present the certificates. Just present my screen.
A very warm good evening to everyone. It has indeed been a very stimulating session, to say the least. I think I was just, struck by one thing about Srijanee. I just couldn't help saying this, that, when it comes to writing what is the popular literature, when you talk about the woman's, problems, the private, this has always been a problematic area. So, Chiclet, I think, actually takes that up, and thank you for bringing it up. We hope in some, there would be a time where we wouldn't be uncomfortable with canonizing or talking about Chiclet as being literature, and not categorizing it as a subgenre. And now over with the presentation of the certificates. So if you could, can I have them on the screen? Yashini, are you presenting it?
Yes, I'm doing it. Is it visible?
No, it's not.
Okay. But here it shows you that I'm presenting. Actually, I didn't see the...
sharing.
Yes, Sharmila ma'am, tell me.
I think it's the whole.
You need to choose the right tab.
Okay, just a minute.
If you're facing from,
Just a minute. I'm presenting. Just a minute.
Sure.
Is it visible now?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Of course, on behalf of iSPELL West Bengal Forum, I would like to thank Professor Anuradha Majumdar, the chairperson of the session today. Thank you for your insightful thoughts, and of course, we take this. I would say questions. We take this references that you have given to us, and I think we will have much food to think over even as we leave this session. So, thank you, Anuradha.
Thank you, Madam Dadi. Thank you so much.
Well. The speaker of the day, Dr. Srijanee Roy. Thank you for taking up this topic, and of course, talking about it. It was such a well prepared, and of course, I could see the passion in the presentation. Thank you, Srijanee, once again for your wonderful presentation. Professor Shilpi Moitro. Yes. Is there anything?
Shilpi Moitro.
Yeah, Shilpi Moitro. She has been the master of ceremony for this particular session. Thank you, Shilpi. You have done a great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Diyashini Roy. She has been the event coordinator. Thank you, Diyashini. It was wonderful to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
On behalf of iSPELL West Bengal Forum, I would like to thank all the participants for being with us. We hope that we have more such stimulating evenings, and you will all stay with us, and we will grow in strength. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And I would now like to invite Dr. Sharmila Paul, the convener of the iSPELL West Bengal Forum, to deliver her vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dayashini. So at the very outset, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Anuradha Majumdar ma'am for kindly gracing our platform as the chairperson and sharing your observations. My heartfelt gratitude goes to Dr. Srijanee Roy for not only accepting our invitation readily, but also sharing your thoughts and your research findings with our audience today. I really thank you both. I really can't thank enough Ms. Shilpi Moitro and Ms. Dayashini Roy for moderating and coordinating the session so efficiently. Any program of iSPELL West Bengal Forum would remain incomplete without thanking Dr. Anupama Vohra ma'am, who's the president of iSPELL India, and Professor G.A. Ghansham, the founder and general secretary of iSPELL India, the EC members of iSPELL India, and the members of other fora of iSPELL for relentlessly supporting us and encouraging us to do better and improve ourselves. Also, a special mention must be made to the unfathomable contribution of the executive committee members of iSPELL West Bengal Forum for their utmost dedication and their active participation in each and every activity of this forum. And it's they who are instrumental in achieving anything that this forum has managed to achieve. They're and last but not the least, definitely not the least, my humble gratitude to all the participants who have joined us today through the Google Meet and our Facebook page. And I really
and the Pandita.
Of course, the Pandita, for giving us all the technical support. So, and of course, I would like to conclude not only thanking all of you
I would also like to apologize if I have forgot to mention anybody in particular. But I would also like to welcome your suggestions, remarks, your comments, and your constructive criticism. So that we may help all of these will help us improve and do better in future. So with that happy note, I'd like to bid adieu to all of you. Thank you again for joining us today. Good night to you all.
Yes, thank you and good night.
Yeah, and the certificates will be mailed to you, all of you. The certificates will be mailed to all of you.
Yes, sure, Rob. Thank you. So I'll be signing off
Thank you,
then.
everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, brother. Yeah, thank you for being there. And thank you, Srijanee. Thank you for being there. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye bye.